Me. So, delighted to have as our speaker today, Paul Simmons from Walk Cornwall, who's also, well, Paul, you can explain for yourself. For those of you who are new to these virtual cafe side talks, we start out with a 20-minute or so talk from a speaker. So they keep it fairly brief. And we then go on to a much, much longer question and answer session, which is your opportunity to ask questions of the speaker and then take the whole talk potentially in a quite different direction. There are two ways that you can join in, but what we do want to suggest is that you hang on until, oh, sorry, no, hold on, I'll do that again. You can use the chat area to put questions or to make any comments as we go along. And then at the end of Paul's talk, we'll go through the chat and any questions that are coming up. You'll continue to have an opportunity to ask questions as you go along. And if anybody's particularly keen to come on screen, of course, you can do so. But the chat area is where people can type in their questions as we go along. Hopefully that's more than enough from me. I'll be chairing the discussion at the end, but my task at the moment is simply to introduce Paul. Paul, you can introduce yourself. Can I just hand over to you at this stage?
Certainly can. Thank you, Robin, and thank you, David, for my quick change. Anyway, because I was out there in the conservatory and I've been promised 3.3 millimeters of rain in the next hour, so I thought I'd better move inside so that you don't get this pitter patter and decide to move on. Thank you very much, and it's lovely to see everyone here and faces and names that I recognise as well. I'm just going to put this into presenter view, so now you can tell me if you actually can see that. So what we're going to do is, as it says coming up, I'm just going to give you a brief history of myself and what I've been doing. And then we will get into the history of Shinrin-yoku, which only goes back 40 years, to about 1982 from Japan. And then I will get into the actual science, because it is a clinically proven therapy. There are a lot of therapies around there that doesn't have the science background, it doesn't have the peer-reviewed nature. And to be honest, for myself, having done 20 years of walking, if it didn't have a scientific background and it wasn't provable, I wouldn't really touch it. So it's quite a personal thing for me. After that, we'll have the questions and answers. And so here we go. The short history. I've run a walking company called Walk Cornwall for about 20 years. And my ethos really is to tell people what I call the layers of Cornwall. Each place you go to has a DNA. Whether you go to St Ives, you go to St Austell, you go to the North Coast, South Coast. And the DNA is made up of these layers. And that could be, start with the geology, the mythology, you've got the fishing, farming, mining, you've got the language. So all these layers, and each place you go to has a certain percentage. So that's the DNA of it. And that's how I tell my stories. Also, I wanted the academic view of Cornwall besides telling what the flowers are. So I did an MA in Cornish Studies in 2005 to 2008. And I've just started a PhD, which was accepted. It's about the climate and ecological emergency that we are, well, not approaching, we are in. And it's the use of the wonderful footpath network that started hundreds of years ago, and it's how we can use them to obtain a lower carbon economy. And I won't go into detail. I could explain more in the questions and answers if you want to. But to give a background of why I've actually come to do forest bathing, is I was also a part of team University of Exeter. They got funding from the European Union to look into the green gym, which is walking into forests, and the blue gym is walking next to the sea, and how that affects your psychological and physiological well-being. And this was back maybe 10, 15 years. And forest bathing has started to become known about over here on these shores in the past, I would say 5 years. And it's something that I do practice when I'm actually taking people walking. I let the landscape do a lot of the talking. You can tell people so much, but it's a phrase called yugen. in Japanese. And it means that, and I'll get to this, it's slow walking, it's using all one's senses, something I practice when I'm doing my walking anyway. It's about smelling, it's about touching, it's about listening to what's going on around you. It's not going from A to B. So I know certain companies and certain people, they do take people and they want to do 11, 12 miles in one day. For me, that's not what about walking is. It's really about using one's senses. And so forest bathing was the logical extension of that. And it's something maybe I've been practicing for 20 years and not knowing it so much. As I said, it's a clinically proven therapy, and we will get into that. And the guide in this sense with forest bathing, normally when you go, someone does something to you. If you go to a physiotherapist, they do something to you. Here we are, as a guide, I'm the conduit. I'm the bridge between you and nature. You know, that is the therapist. It's the woodland that is the therapist, and that is the important point. And it's finding different ways of bringing your senses to connect to nature. So never go into a woodland expecting something, and never go and expect something to happen. So it's very intuitive and it's very playful. And that's one thing that I've come to think about, is that you use these things called invitations. So you take a group into the woodlands and it's intuitive. What actually takes your, what are you listening to? What are you smelling? There are so many different invitations, and it's the guide's viewpoint and starts leading people. And there's no answers to it. Everything that people say is valid. It's how they're feeling. And it's an interconnection between the people and a connection to nature. And you must be playful. You must be childlike. I think that's so important. It's really going back to what we, and I'm sure you all felt when you first went into nature, or even now when you do, there is a certain connection that you get, and it's childlike, and it's something beyond words. And that's what the word yugen, Y-U-G-E-N, means. It's that sense that you cannot explain when you've turned a corner and this view hits you, or there's a smell that takes you back to your childhood or somewhere else. It's that unexplainable connection and feeling and sense that you get, which is very, very important to this. So it is going back. Now, this slight history goes back to 1982, and karoshi is the word. It is literally death by overwork. And if you think of how the Japanese were, they were working so hard. And the amount of people, if you think of 13 million in Tokyo itself, that's 6,000 people per square kilometer, whereas say London is 1,500, Paris is 2,000. So they were really pushed in, they worked hard, and people literally overworking themselves. There we go. I've already mentioned Yugen. This is the feeling too deep to describe, a profound sense of beauty and mystery of the universe. That's what you feel when you go in there. Biophilia, an innate subconscious sense of the need to immerse in nature. That was first promoted by a gentleman by the name of Eric Fromm, and then E.O. Wilson actually came out with a book on biophilia. And it's that connection again, natural connection. And you can go, why Japan? One of the reasons was this word karoshi, but Shinto Buddhism, everything is based on nature. The realm of the divine, all the individual, they call them kodami. These are the souls in trees, in the rocks, in the rivers. So there is a certain mysticism to it, but this has to be, as I said, backed up by the science. And that's where a lot of the therapies diverge. It has to be, especially in the 21st century, we are overstressed, and they call it techno-stress. And Xingli, as these are the books you can buy and you can get, Xingli, Yoshifumi Miyazaki, they were the original people who started doing the scientific experiments. And I always forget his name, but I will find it, is the gentleman who actually worked for the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Fishing. And it was his job to start looking into people from the cities going out into the woodland, but they had to do the scientific research. And it goes back to 7 million years where the humans were, well, the hominids were back in the forest. So it's in our DNA. We have this natural affiliation with being outside. We're not meant to be in cities. And if you think in the 1800s, 3% of the world's population were in cities, and now it's close to 45, 55, and they're looking at it's getting up to the 60s in the next 30 years. So humanity is not really meant to be in cities. And that's what they call it, techno-stress, and the migration of people from, to the urban areas, and that's important. So nature therapy went from this intuitive idea to evidential. So they had to do basic research, and that's what we'll be talking about. Which groups do we test? Where do we test it? And how are we going to measure this stress? And there are certain markers that you can use. Does shinrin-yoku increase the physiological and psychological relaxation? Basically, does forest bathing work? So in 1982, they started this research, and it's still going on. So, and I will point you in certain directions for the papers and the peer-reviewed papers and the constant looking at different groups. But it came down to 4 areas. And you've got the sympathetic and the parasympathetic systems. The sympathetic is measuring the stress levels. So that will overwork, and you want to get the parasympathetic levels to rise, not the sympathetic levels. The parasympathetic is basically the rest and recuperate, whereas the sympathetic is the, what was the words of it, fight and flight. So those are the different types you're looking at. Brain activity, you can measure that. The stress markers in saliva, which is cortisol, and the overall measuring of immune activity. There hasn't been empirical evidence from the Western studies about this energy, this life force, but here is one way that we can actually attain this in the modern day. So the top 3 is that they did a lot of work in the woodlands, and for a control group, which is always very important when you come to scientific research, is they took people into the towns, and then they also did laboratory tests. They did the same kind of things. They took the same, they split groups into 2 or 3, and they alternated where they went. People went to the same hotels, they ate the same food. So they made sure that everything could be equal, so they can get the evidence that they needed, and they can prove it. I'll be talking about these elements. The NK cells, natural killer cells, are white cells, go around the blood. They are there when they work with proteins, certain anti-cancer proteins. They will increase the NK cells, and they are there as a preventative. And this has to be stressed. They are preventative of cancer, and I'll take you a bit further along to what was studied at the Royal Marsden Hospital as well. Phytoncides are the natural elements and natural oils that come out from mainly the evergreen forests. So I've got to stress that as well, because Japan can go through, well, it's a very long, as you know, long islands, and they have a lot of evergreen over there, whereas over here in Britain, we're less so. So a lot of the experiments were done, and the natural oils that they talk about, the phytoncides, are from evergreens. And Mycobacterium vaccae, this was, again, was done by the Edna O'Brien at the Royal Marsden. And I'm just going to have a look. Actually, we'll get to it in itself. Yes, that's it. She was an oncologist, and she injected a serum of it in the cancer patients and noticed they were happier after it with less pain. So we've got to make sure, you know, it's not a cure, it is a preventative, and that's exactly what forest bathing is about. Shinrin-yoku is the Japanese. It's literally translated to forest and bathing, where you don't actually have a shower in the forest, but you actually are there bathing with all your senses and opening yourself up. We would look at the systolic and diastolic blood pressure. When you actually have your blood pressure taken, there are 2 readings, and we'll talk about to that. And I've mentioned the sympathetic and parasympathetic nerve activity. Yes, I do have you'll see a few of these where I'm actually inside trees. If I went back, the one that you might have seen earlier on was the inside of a 2,500 olive tree in Crete, and this was also in Crete. I do tend to do that. I'll give you the results now, because this is what they were proving, and I'll go through the process of how they did this. They found that 2 hours, mainly 3 hours, but 2 hours in the woodland would reduce blood pressure. It increased those NK cells, the natural killer cells. It increased the anti-cancer protein production, and those are the ones that help increase these NK cells. They attack any bad cells in the bloodstream. They actually bore into the actual outside of these cells, and they work that way. It does lift depression. It lowers stress, improves the cardiovascular and metabolic health. It lowers the blood sugar levels, improves energy, the quality of sleep, and memory and concentration. And these are all things that has actually been, as I say, clinically proven. So we get to the first of these experiments. And this, if you'll see on the right-hand side, the forest walking and seated forest viewing, and the percentages are with the control group who are actually in the city. So these are, and there are 62, I think, 62 or 63 forests for forest bathing that are established by the ministry out there. And so they still are doing lots of tests. So you can see when we're talking about the second bottom, the parasympathetic nerve activity, this is the one that is the rest and recuperate. And you can see that you want that to actually increase. And you can see when they're seated, what we're talking one of the invitations is to just sit there. You find a sit spot and you take your time and you listen and you breathe and you're smelling and you're just in one place and you're looking around as well. The actual forest walking itself is over a certain course. Now, I'm used to going 3 to 4 miles an hour. I think we all are. This is completely opposite. It's 3 hours per mile. That's how you're doing. You're stopping every so often. Again, depending on who's taking you and how you're led, but you do not walk fast. So you can see, again, what you're looking for is saliva and the cortisol concentration. This is actually going down. And what I'll show you in a minute is that this can actually last 3 to 5 days later. They have taken a lot of the experiments. They start beforehand and they'll take measurements maybe the day before, on the day, 3 days later, and 5 days later. So we'll see a few of those. Here you go, blood pressure, cortisol, and adrenaline. These are the group tested. Now you'll see lots of papers out there with a variety of different people, different ages, different gender, different maybe problems or medical or problems that they have, and they've tested them again at different types and different times. The results again on the left. Reduction, that's what they found over a period of time, before and after therapy. Another group, 26 office workers, and they take the average age as well. And here again shows 4 times, 3 days before, on the day, 3 days, and 5 days after. And they were doing it 3 times a day. Again, they were all in one place. They all ate the same time. They all slept the same time. And you'll notice overall, even though if you look on the right hand side before dinner and before lunch, they tend to go up again. compared to what it was beforehand, whether it's the blood pressure, when they're doing it over time, has decreased from when they started 3 days before to 5 days after. Here we go, another group, 17 women, average age 62. And it just shows again the stress levels going up on the right hand side, the red arrow, and you want to see it go down, and this is what they actually get. And you can read that if you want. So you know, these levels are significantly lower. And then people say, well, you know, why do I have plants around my house? Because they do actually work as well. They had these school children that actually, what they did, I think, if I can remember rightly reading it, is they got them to look at it for a few minutes and then look away for a few minutes. They put them in different places around where they were. There is a list, if you want to look at, there's a list of different plants that you can have around your house, which will be very, very good for you. You know, we know about the exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen, and this is again proven that having them around your house is very, very good. And I have got a list, and I can actually give them to you later on. But moving on. And this is where one of those peer-reviewed papers that you can go and find, and it's by you know, Mary O'Brien and a few others. And again, I must underline, it is a preventative and not a cure for everything. There is no magic bullet, and I don't think we'd expect it to have a magic bullet. And it's about quality of life. And I think in this day and age, we don't have quality of life indicators, even in our economic system. You know, it's one of those things that you don't have. And I think we are all finding out nowadays that especially what's happened in the pandemic, that when people slowed down and didn't do anything, I think their quality of life was heightened, and people said, I don't want to go back to the normal, whatever that was, whether you call it normal or abnormal. And it's just exactly how you feel. There's no problems about bringing out how you actually feel in this day and age. And this is exactly what it was, what they proved here. Mycobacterium vaccae is, if you actually go into the woodland and you take a bit of soil in your hand and you smell it, that is the Mycobacterium vaccae. It's a smell, but it's also, you know, it's a bacteria, and that's the smell you get. Petrichor, by the way, if you want to know, is that smell after the rain has come. That's a wonderful smell as well. A qualitative way of looking at this is through the establishment of POMS tests, and there are 4 different types of POMS tests, and this is one of them. Profile of mood states, and if you look at the bottom there, they've got 6 of the mood scales, and they fit all the others because they're very, very close to each other. How do you actually say, you know, the difference between tense and angry sometimes, or on edge, or, you know, so it's they're looking at how those fix into the 6 scales there. And the important thing here is to say this is one of those that they actually have a questionnaire, so it's not measured except by how you feel. So it's an important balance, I think, in establishing what people felt after a certain period of doing forest bathing. And as I said, it's about 2 to 3 hours where they have a noticeable difference when they're doing this. If you want to see any more information about this, I'm a member of the INFOM, the Society of Nature and Forest Medicine. It was set up quite a few years ago. They have a number of papers, and that is the, if you want to go to the paper and books URL that I've just put up there, you'll find a lot more to actually have a look, all the different ways they've done this. And they've researched and the results, and it's something that's ongoing, and it always will be. And it's an important source of information. It's coming towards the end, really. This is one of my favorite trees, actually, along the Helford River. And you look at it from, I actually sometimes sit there. You can do forest bathing in a park. You can do it with one tree. And this has all spread over to America. And I can talk a bit later if you want to ask me questions about how people become practitioners. Is there a code of ethics? Is there, you know, is there training and things like that? I can talk about that, but this was more about the science. But I'm very happy to answer this because there is a whole politics about this. And one of the people who organized this in America, he says he had one of his best experiences of forest bathing in a car lot with one tree. Okay, I'll leave that to the imagination. We have some wonderful woodlands here. I take people out very close in my parish, Maid Parish. There are some wonderful woodlands there with some trees that are hundreds of years old, dripping in ferns. I actually did a little television 5 minutes with Julia Bradbury that should be coming out very soon, the next few weeks. And I took her along one of the rivers, Frenchman's Creek it was. And these are places that have got trees that are 400 or 500 years old, but you can do them anywhere. So this tree, as I say, reality is not what it seems. If you go to the side of this tree, that's what it looks like. So there are, what I'm basically establishing is there all angles that you can come to this. And that's my email address at the bottom. I am setting up a website, Forest Bathing Cornwall. And that's always a question that people say, do you hug trees? Do we have to do it? Yes, folks, we do, because that is very much one part of actually feeling and touching and smelling. And it is an important part. And I'm very happy to take people out to do this at any time, starting in the spring. So I think that's virtually all I've got to tell you. Okay. So.
Hold on, I'm muted and I'm trying to unmute. I'm getting mixed messages from my screen. Can you actually hear me?
Yes, Robin, you're off.
Yeah, okay.
We can hear you.
I think there's a slight delay there in the messages I was getting. Okay, folks. A quick reminder for those who are not familiar, we always ask our speaker to give a short talk and throw out a lot of ideas that we can then ask in a lot more detail about. So this is now your opportunity to dig away at any of the things that you've heard in the last 20 minutes or so, heard and seen. One thing I should mention before we go is that we do record all of these talks. And so if you would rather remain incognito, there are ways, in fact, you can change your identity even on the screens that show. But part of the deal, if you want to participate and be involved in these talks, is that we do record them. So your presence here will be known, unless you can find some way to be incognito. Right, at this stage, I'm going to start looking through the chat. We don't at the moment have any particular questions coming up, so I'll start the ball rolling with a question of my own. Okay. Paul, can I just check one thing? One of the slides that you showed was called the contrast between urban and forest. But in the more detail of the particular items that you showed, including some really quite interesting things about pulse rate going down faster in the seated forest view than in the actual forest view. But that describes seated forest view as against urban.
No, the control group is the urban. What you saw the figures for were the ones who were actually in the forest.
Ah, right, okay. So it's seated in the forest.
So the percentage was lower than the control group in the urban. That's the way they did it.
Gotcha. So there
what they did is they put the same people in different days. They split them up into two groups. And they actually had the first group, well, the two groups were just basically alternated between the urban and the forests, so they could actually make those comparisons.
Okay, but they were there. They just weren't quite as immersed as you would be
They did exactly the same thing. They would actually do the sitting in the and walking as they would do in the forest. They did the same thing in the urban area. So they matched everything.
But for those people in the forest, you had a seated group and an ambulant group.
Yeah, you did both. You did one. You did a sit, and then you did an amble, and you did the same thing in the urban area. So
Okay, that clarifies it. Right, we've got a few questions coming in, so let me switch over to this. Oh dear, suddenly more moving rather fast. Lindsay asks if you have contact with slow ways.
Yes.
If you know what slow ways is, perhaps you can explain. Otherwise, we'll ask Lindsay to explain what that is. I don't know this.
Lindsay, if you know more, that's fine. But I could say what slow ways is for. I'm quite happy for you to.
No, I just went to the launch. Well, did the launch on Zoom the other day. But I assumed you probably knew about it. I thought it was really interesting.
It is. What they've done is they've actually they're linking up the whole of Britain through the footpaths system, and they're trying to make it, I suppose, as the quick, although it's slow ways, it's actually walking. You can walk it, but they're trying to find the paths that you can actually get between one community and another, utilizing the footpaths that there are already. And it's bringing back, because we've got to bear in mind 2026 is the definitive map for all footpaths that we have and know about that are not on the definitive map at the moment should still be there. So they're basically trying to link up all the communities throughout Britain so you can walk through Britain in the more direct way around. So it's more like a mesh work rather than a network, if you see what I mean.
And from what you were saying, whereas forest basing is really about the person and the forest with the guide as the conduit, as you were saying, the thing about pathways is that they have a social and historical meaning.
Exactly.
There's an extra dimension to walking on a path that has a role in its community and the history of the country, even the sense of identity and so on.
Yeah, so and what I'm doing, just to give you a brief outline for the actual PhD, is actually linking communities up, utilize, for mental and physical health, for biodiversity loss, replanting, so for carbon sequestration, for access basically, and to go from A to B without using cars and things like that. So that's what the actual PhD, and it's actually utilizing what was there a few hundred years ago.
So what I'd like to suggest then is that for the moment we concentrate mainly on the forest bathing, and we bring you back in a few years' time.
Very happy
to talk about the pathways. Actually, perhaps we should do it in the last year before your PhD, because that's usually the point at which people just wish they'd never started. It might revive your interest.
Well, I want to get people involved anyway who are part of the communities, because that's the whole idea is,
So you will want volunteers or participants at least.
If you want to help your own health and well-being, or you want to get involved with planting trees, or you want to help with biodiversity loss, then yes, you will get involved, and that's the whole idea of it.
Is there a right time to register an interest?
In about 6 months, I'll make an announcement, because I'm still going through ethical considerations.
So we can, another advantage of membership, folks, we can send out an email to anybody who's a member.
Yeah.
Hopefully you'll get the news from other sources as well. Okay, I'm going to continue to work our way through some of the other questions. There seem to be plenty coming up. You stressed the role of the guide as the conduit, and Sarah asks, how do you train to be a forest guide? Are there courses available? Are they available in England, I guess would be another question.
Yes, there are certain associations, and you can look them up. And as I say, it was from Japan originally, and it seems like I'm going to try and be wary of my words. It's the American took it to heart, and they've actually started a very big association. There's a European association, and they've all started up in the past maybe 5-7 years, and there is a very long period of actually learning to become. They seem to have ideas of what invitations you should do, and you can spend quite a bit of time. You get mentored through it as well. And so yes, is the short answer. There are associations. I've been on a practitioner course just a couple of weekends really, with a gentleman down in Devon. But as I said, I've been doing these kind of things for many years, and I want to become accredited. I've got all the insurances and all that kind of stuff, and I'm actually thinking of starting up the courses myself and being accredited through something that's been going for at least 20, 30 years, and they understand the idea of accrediting.
And is the accreditation, is this body primarily from Japan with kind of outposts here, or you were saying it's starting in America as well?
Well, they've got the American, there's a couple of over there, and they say they are the ones that you should, you know, they do some around Europe, they do some in England. There are European associations. And as I say, they have, you've got to look at what they're actually offering and see if you want to actually be part of that. Because when you actually look at it and you say, well, if it started 5-7 years ago, how do I put this? How did they become accredited with gravitas? That's what I will say. Is have they actually thought of everything? It's because in the end, it is something that you're talking about a body's natural resistance to disease. You're looking at how you look at that rather than ways of treating people in the forest itself. You know, there's a lot of paperwork, let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And at this stage, for something which is only goes back 40 years, inevitably there will be different schools with slightly different emphasis. And I guess from what you're saying is you choose the one that works best for you.
I would do. I'd say you have to look at it carefully, how long you want to take, how much money you want to spend, and whether it's actually going to cut any mustard with people who you are taking as well. You know, you've got to be, you know, passionate about what you want to do, and you've got to open yourself. It's down to you, not down to the company you're with.
And having been a psychiatric social for most of my career, I can assure you it's exactly the same with just about every form of psychotherapy. There are many different schools. What matters is that you find what the one that fits for you. But I'm going to move us straight on now. Here's somebody getting a quickie version perhaps of what you can get from it. Can you give us some tips on heightening the senses when in the forest in order to keep focus and to keep alert?
Yes, it is. When you actually go there, first of all, you've got to make that the mark, the difference between where you are and when you're actually going into the forest itself. There is a place where you say, right, I'm moving from the outside world into the forest. So you actually attuning yourself in some ways. Breathing is very important. It's trying to breathe properly and slowly, and actually move very slowly, and believe in your senses. Something might actually take your senses. You might actually smell something, so you follow it. You might hear something. You might touch something and follow the sound. And that's what you've got to do. You really got to go slowly. You've tried to go, in some ways, what they teach you in yoga is you try to empty your mind of you know, where am I going to be tomorrow? What time am I going to stop and all that. You really do have to concentrate. Or not even concentrate, just let yourself go, but go very slowly and breathe slowly and notice everything. Think of each of your senses, and you'll find that you will slow down. You know, it's in your DNA, it's there.
And from what you were saying, creating or imagining some kind of boundary as you step into the area where you will have that more heightened awareness.
Yeah.
So sometimes it will happen naturally because there's a stile or a fence, and sometimes you have to think yourself into it.
Well, one of the invitations we have is you're actually creating rooms as well. You know, and those rooms could be you know, a couple of trees. They could be certain twigs that are lined. It could be something where you heard the blackbirds. You know, again, there are no boundaries. There's no wrong answers to what you're actually feeling. It's how you attune to what's going on and how much you notice. One of my favorite ones is actually looking at a very small point. You hold it far away like yourself, you know, like I'm doing, and then you get bigger and bigger to actually what you're seeing, and you're actually noticing so much that you would have missed. If you think of every meter that you go, what you're missing, you know, so you look at every single meter. So it's really slowing down and taking everything in.
Don't know about the rest of you, but I'm finding this a lovely worked example of how it helps to have a guide to take you into that experience. I'll rattle on through. Lisa asks, are there any differences between the cultures, between East and West, obviously, in particular, in how we respond? Does it seem that all humans do this to some extent, or does the culture you come from make it more or less accessible?
I think there's a cultural aspect of it. I think because if you're going back into what I was saying, it's ingrained in us to actually be, you know, biophiliac. You know, we have this natural tendency. We have to go back to where humanity started, and we all started from one place. But what we've added is the cultures, and I'm sure the Japanese, because of their culture of having all these different you know, the religions and the stories that they tell, are going to you might have more reverence, I think, over there. For how you actually view nature itself. Is nature to be exploited, or is nature to be encompassed? I think that's also something else. I think it's very important that it would be nice to be actually have nature being taught at schools here. I think if people don't know it, they don't understand it, they won't look after it. So I think we've lost that connection, and I think it's why it's so popular now, because people are so disconnected. And I think more in the way we are, as I said, we've gone from 1800 where 3% of people lived in cities to now 50, 60. We have lost that connection. So I think that's more important than maybe culture, but there are certainly cultural issues and items that are important. Yeah.
And granted, this has been around for 40 years and the research is only starting to be done. It's a bit too soon to look for too many such differences. It has to be a larger, statistically a larger group anyway, before you can actually start to identify. So but this could be maybe something of a cutting edge area to identify if there are particular mindsets. This takes us on rather nicely actually to the next question we have from Henry. Are there any subjects that this really doesn't work with? He says he knows people who really dislike being in the countryside. Both cases, or is it really a case of horses for courses?
I mean, you know, and I'm not being flippant when I say this, but if you're agoraphobic, obviously it's the worst place that you could actually be. And I think people are, sometimes they can't stand the quiet. I think, you know, you think, and I find it the opposite way, you know, how people can have noise all the time. Some people have to have radios and televisions in the background and all things. I think, as I say, I still go back to this lost disconnection about actually being quiet so there are people, you know, who won't like it, but I think the reaction when they've actually done this is wonderful. It is very emotive, and maybe it's for people who find it hard to bring out emotions, would find it hard for people who need something to happen. I did a lot of environmental education with the Wildfowl and Wetlands Trust, and it was very urban in the middle of London. And the reaction was like, okay, nature, so what? And that's quite an interesting, you know, angle to come from. So I have to explain, they want buttons to press, or they want something to happen. And the whole idea is you have to actually change that mindset, saying it will happen, but it happens slowly, and it is amazing. And it doesn't happen. We are got a shorter attention span. So I think really, in answer to that, Henry, it would be it's difficult for people who maybe don't have that empathy with nature and don't understand it and need to be shown that, you know, how many of us have taken younger kids sometimes out there and, you know, they go, oh, I don't want to go there, it's boring. And once they get out there, they just play with sticks and they actually, you know, invent things themselves, and they just find the most amazing things that could do with nature, because they've got that childlike wonder, and it's wonderful to see, you know. So yes, I think there are things that don't work, but you've got to find these invitations that will work for them.
Mm-hmm. And we have a question that links in with this, with Sarah is asking, hold on, it links in with the suggestion that an agoraphobic might find being out in the open air particularly challenging, should we say. So Sarah asks whether you can get the same effect from a garden.
Absolutely.
Would be a more safely contained, or for that matter, from a room with some plants, as you were suggesting earlier.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of, say, in those books that I showed you, yes, there's certain plants you can go down. I went on to the moor in Falmouth to speak to them about getting some plants as well, because I'm bereft of a few plants. But I did start a garden this year. I moved here and I just started vegetable gardening. And it's amazing when you stop there and you actually take a little, as I was doing before with this little, having a look and see what happens, what's in that little space. If you're doing that, the light changes, movement changes, the smells that will come up will change. And you can stand there for 5-10 minutes and note all the different things that change. One of my invitations is about that. Is big change, small change. What was the smallest change you saw or you're going to see in 20 minutes? And each invitation can take 20-30 minutes to do. What is the smallest change? What's the largest change you're going to see in a certain area? And it's amazing when you stop in the woodland. Let's take it the other way. When you actually walk through it, there's all the cool signs of the birds saying, careful, something's happening, and they will disappear. If you're sitting there, all of a sudden they'll come back. Oh, well, not all of a sudden, but over a period of time, they will come back. And that's one of the beauties of it. So yes, definitely gardens, and they say parks are one of the other places you can do it.
The length of time issue is actually about to come up in the next question, but I'll just pause for a brief moment. We've had 1 or 2 people arriving since the talk started, and one other person asking if you can get a copy of the talk, including with the Q&A. So yes, for the benefit of people who've arrived a little late, all of our talks are recorded, and we have a library, which I'm sure David here will be putting the link in the chat even as we speak. We have a library where you can look up or even send the link to other people if you tell people about it and they're interested in catching up. So for anybody coming late, if you've missed a bit, well, you have missed a bit, don't worry, you can catch up and read this later. Otherwise, the conversation continuously teases out new issues, so hopefully you haven't missed too much. But I said we would get back to the question of the length of time to get some benefit from this. David asked, how often do you need to do forest bathing for this to have a meaningful impact on your health and well-being? It seems like quite a time commitment for a regular activity, especially at the speed of 3 hours per mile.
Yeah, I mean, I read something a few days ago that made me laugh. It says, if you've got time, spend 20 minutes. If you haven't got time, spend an hour. That's I think a great summation of the effects. If you really need it, it will tell you. Again, trust yourself. It's not about watch. It's not about time. It's not about miles or whatever. You can do half a mile in 3 hours. It all depends on that day and what they are. You get used to it, and you can do it yourself, and you'll find with all these different invitations that you can do, and make them up yourself as well. It's about how you feel. It's about connecting again with your senses, and you might get to the first place and it will just be absolutely amazing, and you'll just wander around a little bit and you'll sit, and then you'll notice various things, and it'll take you on that little journey, like little jigsaw pieces, really. So half an hour is fine. Once you've found yourself breathing slowly, naturally, and you've actually noticed things, and you go out and then you notice there's a difference in yourself, then it's successful. And they do actually say, like they say with some of the drugs you take, be careful, don't drive after this, and don't use heavy machinery or things. It does have that soporific effect on you, or it should do anyway. And don't expect for something to happen at certain points. It's really got to go in with an open mind and let it work. And it does, as I say, that's why I'm here. It has been clinically proved to work on various things. You'll notice by your sleep patterns getting better, your concentration is getting better, things like that. That's important to a lot of people. I was on I was talking to fellow PhD students today, and I offered this service, and they went, fantastic, because they're all worried and they're stressed about things. I said, this is one thing that can help with concentration.
But perhaps we should advise people that you also, it's not illegal to have a soporific effect, and it doesn't invalidate your insurance if you drive afterwards. Okay, one of our regulars, Peter, asks if you could send him a list of references to the papers that you've shown, and he's given his email address. I'd actually like, by all means, let's email him individually, but I'd like to suggest that you send that to us and we put it on the website as well, so that other people, if they are wanting to have a look at, haven't watched the video again, that they can also read through some of those particular references.
Okay, I mean, there's also say that Infom, they've got news and references. You can actually go to there. They've got lots of those. You can go to, I think, the American Society as well. They've got some in European societies. I mean, you can start looking at shinrin-yoku and look at the different societies there are, and there'll be some references there. But I'm very happy to add something to that as well.
Okay, we've got another question that's in a way ties in the issue about cultural diversity, but from the other angle. Do you think that climate diversity translates into different effects from forest bathing, say temperate forests versus Mediterranean or tropical? You did mention that it tended to be that a lot of the research comes from Japan, which has a particular flora and fauna. But can we identify, are people starting to identify different biochemical ambiances and environments, or is it more a matter of a fit between the person and the place that's meaningful and healthy for them?
There's definitely different geographies will mean different plants, different habitats, especially evergreens, because they are the ones who have mainly the phytoncides, which are the natural oils that talk to each other. You know, it helps the trees talk to each other. They actually invite parasites to, and so there's going to be different forests you can go to. I'm just looking here, actually, is things like cedar, Douglas fir, spruce, and in Japan, there's the hinoki. They've got various phytoncides. So yes, depending on where you go, it's better going to pine forests for it to work. But we also have here our woodlands, which have got trees of hundreds of years on. You know, you go to the oak and they've got 500 different associated species. So there's a lot more biodiversity going on there, and that's again part of the invitation is noticing those. So the answer again, yes, is climate diversity. Depending on where you go to in the world, you might get different experiences. Just looking at your question. So yes, it does translate. Different forests will give different outputs.
And the lichen that we have down here in Cornwall with our air so clear must be a pretty unique biosphere anyway. Yeah.
There are, and there's hundreds of them. I think it's sulfur dioxide or sulfur that they actually are indicating how much sulfur is in the air. And there's, I think, 600 species here. And so yes, there are people who are lichenologists who can actually tell how much parts per quarter million are in the air. You know, so they know by the species. So yeah, species are very important.
Okay, I'm going to move us on. We have a question coming up from Karen about social prescribing and tying that in with the amount of social isolation there is at the moment. But Karen, I'm struggling a little bit to work out, it's very difficult when you're typing fast, isn't it? I'm struggling to work out what the stress in your question is. So I'm going to ask if Karen will be interested in coming in and asking that question herself in your own way. If you're not keen to, then by all means simply don't. But Karen, if you're out there, would you like to ask that question yourself?
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just thinking that because quite a few people are having to isolate and they might be on their own and obviously don't have any human contact. And I was reading recently that having contact with obviously pets or animals or even trees, you know, could be beneficial to them. And I was wondering whether with the, you know, the social prescribing that's sort of rolling out across Britain, whether there are any sort of forest school people, forest bathers who are, you know.
Yeah, there's definitely forest schools going on, and actually there are links between the NHS individual surgeries and doctors who will prescribe going out. And this is one of the things that I think America are quite advanced on that, and Europe is actually getting used to that, is actually contacting the NHS and forest schools to offer their services, because people, I think it was in Scotland, doctors were prescribing going on walks, and they were prescribing that, you know, as they would a pill and all that. So I think it's only a matter of time. And again, because of what I'll be doing for my research, I will be approaching the NHS and individual surgeries around this area to say, you know, this is good for health and well-being. So it is the beginning really here. It's only been, I think, the past year that forest bathing has actually got off the ground. But there is a lot of potential because, again, it's that reconnection to nature. And I think everyone realizes it's just joining those dots between, you know, if nature's good for you, well, you know, should we prescribe it? What a great idea. You know, it's sort of like that idea, of course, you know, it's let's go back to nature and let's throw our children out and say, don't come back till 5 o'clock, you know, and that's what happened in, you know, in my youth and all that kind of stuff. I think there was a statistic that in, I think, the 1940s, 50s, the average, I think the average amount of miles away from home that children went was something 5 miles, and now it's 300 meters. I mean, that is scary. And so I think there is a link between that. It will be done soon, hopefully, Karen.
Actually, before we go on, Karen, can we just ask you to explain, some of us are well familiar with the concept of social prescribing, but not everybody will be. Would you just care to unpack that a little bit for those who don't know?
I'm not sure I'm an expert. There's some people here I know who are much more, I went to a talk by Jane Howard and she's much more eloquent on the subject.
We have Jane coming on soon, so we can, we'll tease it out of her there.
It's, you know, it's basically sort of trying to take the pressure off the health service for people that maybe sort of social aspects or aspects of their lives are impacting on their health, and sort of they can be prescribed, I don't know, an art class, or they can be prescribed, you know, a walk in a forest, obviously, like Paul said, and you know, it's been proven that these things can help just as much as tablets or pills.
Can I also just, I mean, I'm going to give a list out in a couple of minutes, maybe after the next question, of the 10 plants that you can actually buy now, you know, go out and put them in your house. You know, that will help. Because I know that might be of interest to people as well. So I'm quite happy to go through those. So if you want, get pen and paper ready.
Again, so that we can put on the website, maybe, so that people can come back to and look up another time. I'm tempted to go straight to Jane Howard, but I won't. Hang on, Jane. We'll get to you in a minute. I'm just going to firstly quote. Irena asks, morning, midday, evening. You did mention with some issues there was a difference between when, before and after breakfast or lunch. Is that to do with digestion? Is it to do with the ambience, the natural light? Any idea what, if there is a difference, any idea what makes sense of it?
Yeah, the context I used it in is that they wanted to have a control group. So they made sure that everyone ate the right thing at the right time. So they had breakfast together, they ate the same thing, they had lunch together, they did the tests before, the day before lunch, sometimes after lunch. So that was the context for that. But it is an interesting question about morning, midday and evening. I think some people are morning people, some people are evening people. Everyone loves a sunrise, you know, everyone loves a sunset. I think if you get more naturally out of that, then that's a good time to go. But, you know, I don't think there is a natural, I'll be honest, having looked back at what I've done and what other people have done, you know, you go through the whole day, you can spend a whole day and see the difference. But I'm stressing that, you know, again, 2 to 3 hours at any time is much better for you than not doing it. So, you know, that's an interesting question. Maybe I'll look into that a bit more about when the best day is and look for maybe some papers that said which way is different.
There's always the classic researcher's cop-out of more research is needed. But in fairness, if this has only been going for 40 years, it is going to take time before people start to tease out what's the next lot of questions that it's interesting to ask and then to get answers on. Right, we're going to start to run out of time, so I'm going to try and move us on rapidly through things. Jane has asked, is it really about nature, or is it more specifically about perhaps particular trees or trees and whole, or even just one tree? Because you did have one person saying that their experience was of one tree. But Jane, we have been asking somebody, it's been suggested that you might want to talk a little bit about social prescribing and maybe the arts health connection more generally. Would you be happy to come on, have a quick say hello?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Paul. Nice to see
Hi,
you.
Gary. Yeah, good to see you.
And you're a Brummie.
I'm a Brummie. Yeah, I am a Brummie.
No.
Surrounded by woodland, you know, in Birmingham, and that's really interesting. Actually, I do notice in autumn down here. I notice the difference. Autumn is not as there's not such a change that I noticed in Birmingham. You would really notice that because Birmingham is full of trees and forests and everything. Anyway, social prescribing, yeah. So I mean, it's about a non-clinical intervention. So it's about the fact that between 30 and 50% of people who turn up to their GP they're turning up for a reason that is a non-medical reason, that is something that actually doesn't have a medical solution. It's not got a clinical solution to that problem. And so it's a recognition that there are actually other sources of support out there for people. So that could be things like, you know, housing or legal advice or debt advice, you know, it's those sorts of things. But it's also about how do we support people's mental well-being, and that could be around sort of arts and creativity, which has been shown to be really beneficial for people's health and well-being. It's about nature, it's about being in the natural environment. So the blue gym, green gym, you know, the forest bathing, all of those things are really important. It could be about volunteering, you know, so there's a whole range of things. And the NHS England has recognised that those interventions are really important, and so are really rolling out social prescribing. And the way it works generally is that a patient might pitch up at a GP surgery, and the GP recognises that their problem isn't a medical one necessarily, or it's got other aspects to it, and will refer them on to a link worker, key worker, someone like that, who will sit down with them and make a personalised plan based on their interests and the resources that are available locally and what their issues are. So that's how it works. So yeah, forest bathing, nature therapies and all of that are a really important part of it. So yeah, alongside arts, of course, which I'm going to be championing. So
Well, we could try and get you in another time maybe to talk about the health benefits of
definitely.
arts. Absolutely. But your original question was, and we have somebody else a little further down in the chat questions asking something similar. Would it work with just one single tree? I think you've already touched on this, Paul, but do you want to come back to how we've already had how long? Now the question is how many, how all round, how wrap around does this experience need to be?
It's like a length of string. It's how you react to the surroundings yourself. You know, it might be, you know, you might be overawed by going into a woodland and going, you know, where do I start? That's why it's always good just to go with a guide to open these ideas, and then you go off yourself. Yes, it can be done, but I'm not convinced it can be done with one tree. You know, it's best to go into a woodland or a park or somewhere that you can really totally relax. But in essence, yes, it can be. But you can't prejudge that until you actually do it and see what works for you individually.
And I suppose if you're near a forest, it's easier to be immersed in a forest. If you're a long distance away, a tree is at least a place to start.
Yeah, and we've got small woodlands. You know, the ones I do around Maeve, you know, they're very small. I'm talking about maybe 50 meters by you know, 20 meters. You know, so that's not enormous. You know, you can find in woodlands, lots of woodlands around that are that small. They don't have to be a giant forest. But start more water. Water is important. I've got to add that as well. is there are lots of limitations about water because let's talk about the actual mist that you get from water. There's a certain vibrancy that you get that you wouldn't get, say, sitting in an office. So there's certain properties that you get from running water that is very good, and there's lots of invitations that you do with water, because you're looking at the whole cycle of water, from going down rivers to going to the sea to going up to the clouds. So there's lots of dynamics there and lots of layers there that you can actually incorporate. So rivers are important to be by.
Okay. I'm going to, because we've got a lot of questions coming up, I'm going to try and put together 3 questions that seem to me to be coming at the same issue from slightly different angles. On the one hand, we have a question as to how necessary it is to have a guide to do this inviting. Somebody else is wanting to say, are there close connections between this practice of engagement and being open to the experience? So, a lot of that sounds quite like mindfulness, which is something that traditionally people do courses on, but afterwards then do for themselves. And Amanda asks, would you advocate, or would you actually particularly recommend not doing something else, like creating something whilst you're there, in the way that a potter, say, engages with a wheel? Or is it better to not put anything else in the way, to simply be there? 3 different questions about the kind of connection with the environment and the extent to which you need a mediator.
Yeah, I think it's like anything you do. If you want to learn the piano, if you want to be a potter, it is always good to have someone who knows something about it rather than trying it yourself. It's just all I'm doing is being the, say, the conduit. It's not a business as such. So yes, you do need someone there to open the ideas, and then you invent your own. So I say yes, it's best to go with somebody. There's also this group dynamic as well. When you go out with people, when you actually sit down and you start talking to people, how do you feel? And it is quite an emotional thing as well, because people, they are out there in the woodlands, and they actually have relaxed and they can actually talk to each other. But yes, you can do it by yourself, certainly. But there is something wonderful about a dynamic of having people there as well, and picking up on ways to do the invitations. What's the second question?
Connection with mindfulness.
Yes, there is a link with mindfulness and grounding as well, things like that. I mean, one of the invitations is actually take your shoes off, because, and go barefoot, because you're reconnecting again to the current, this global current that we have. It's very important to be part of it. Yes, it's all one part of a whole therapy, I think, as well. So, I wouldn't want someone to say, well, I only do this and I only do that. It's one holistic way of doing, of reconnecting. And that's the important thing, is just reconnecting to nature and putting us where we are as one part of nature, and not dominant over it, and respecting it and being humble. I think that's a very, very important part of being in nature. I go out there, and it's like I reset every time I go out there. It's rebooting, and to understand and feel the beauty of it. And it is very emotional, I think. And I think that's what we need. I think we need more of that. I think we need more grounding, literally, physically and physiologically.
Okay, I'm going to try again, put together a couple of linked issues.
Can I just, while you're there, I did promise I've got the list here of those indoor plants that I was thinking of. So they've got the peace lily, golden pothos, English ivy, chrysanthemum, the Gerbera daisy, mother-in-law's tongue, bamboo palm.
Who would have guessed that?
Azalea, red-edged Dracaena, spider plant, and then you go to one of the others, and these are out the two of the books that I've got. These 2 books, and they'll give you. And this is from Shigley. He's put the areca palm, lady palm, the corn plant, miniature date palm, long-leaved fizz, Boston fern, peace lily comes up again, and a rubber plant. So, and the essential oils, you can actually burn essential oils, and so you get this oils from, you know, like eucalyptus. We're so used to eucalyptus oils and things like that, this is where they come from. These are the essential oils that, you know, lower the blood pressure. And they've got Douglas fir, cedar wood. They contain certain terpenes, so which are very important. Oh, sorry, I just thought just before I forget those.
And we'll put that list on the website somewhere if anyone wants to double check. But that's good. You mentioned essential oils. I was just going to come back to, we have one particular question from Steve G. We have something of the philosophy about immersion and the health benefit and so on, and you've got some very specific, well-evidenced effects. But in between those two, are there any broad theories over what mechanisms there are and how those mechanisms do actually get us the improved health markers?
I think it went from being intuitive to have to be proven. I think in this day and age you have to prove it, so there is that leap that you have to make. I think the theories were that again, we're disconnected. We've moved into a faster pace, you know, where there's more cancers, there's more psychological problems. So why is this happening? I think those are the questions that were asked, and out of those come theories that, you know, the questions that need proven. So I think that's where it's come from. We've moved so far, technically advanced, and the Japanese was completely stressed. They techno stress that happened, and I think they were asked, you know, we have to do something about that. So the Ministry of Agriculture and
so it starts pragmatic and finds the research base and then gets. We have one particular wonderful way to be anonymous. We have one person who's identified only by a number, though he or she may well be a free man. Very interesting. He or she was wondering, does oxytocin get released by hugging trees in the same way that it does when hugging a fellow human? Has there been research of what happens to the neurological system, particularly when you sleep in a wood? Now, let's leave the sleep bit as a separate issue, but in terms of oxytocin and the connections with what evidence there is of oxytocin from human to human, has anything parallel been looked into?
In the books that I've gotten and the research I've done, I haven't come across oxytocin itself as specific research. But I think it's when it comes to the sleep, yes, it has been proven that, you know, your concentration is better, your sleep is deeper, and these are through the actual.
But that's afterwards.
Yes.
I don't, you know.
To be honest, you know, hugging a tree, why is it good for you? Why has it come through as this mythological story or this narrative? And I'm sure somewhere they will find those, there are certain chemicals that are released, dopamine and cortisol, you know, some of the chemicals that we talk about. So I'm sure there is a chemical there, as I say, oxytocin, that has been proven to be part of that process of hugging trees. That's as far as I can tell you, anyway.
Mm-hmm. My worry about sleeping in a wood is that you could wake up with a dreadful crick in the neck.
Yeah.
Okay. Can I just come back then? I think we have touched on most of the questions that have come up so far. If anybody feels that there was a question that hasn't really been thoroughly approached yet, by all means do put it in the chat again. I just wanted to come back to one thing. When you were looking at the seated view as against the walking view, the only item on which seated viewing seemed to score better than actually walking in the woods was the pulse rate. And the pulse seems to be a much more immediate reaction to exactly where you are here and now. I found that quite an interesting finding? It's the one thing that went in a different direction. Is there anything more that you can tease out about that?
I mean, just from being doing physical work, you are going to actually make the heart work harder. And by sitting, you are actually breathing. And I think it's the multi effects of your senses. But I think it's about motoring, you know, it's going to actually change it. And, you know, if you're sitting and you're still, I think you're noticing a lot more, to be honest.
Okay, that makes sense. And there is quite a lot of research that in an ordinary hospital, a general medical hospital, whoever is placed in the bed nearest the window,
yes,
is going to recover better. You know this research.
Yes, I've seen that research as well. And yes, if they've got greenery out there, then they're more likely to respond in a positive way. Yeah.
And even looking at a fish tank, as I understand it. What about, you know, these days we all have screens. We're surrounded by TV screens with pictures of roaring fires or fish tanks or whatever. Has there been any comparative research done as to how much does it need to be real tree, and how could you get the same impact just from looking at a tree
I think
on a screen?
it must be out there, because I think it's just the effect that a screen has on people, and as opposed to being in the natural world, because you're more in control of what that is. And also there must be, I'm not too sure the effects actually of looking at a screen, but I think that it keeps your brain going a lot more, and makes you much more stressful. Whereas nature it's done what it's done for 4.6 billion years, to be honest. So I think it's got the edge on how we interact with nature, as opposed to how we react with technology. I think, as much as I'd like to say, you know, being part of this science community, we need proof. I think we ask ourselves, to be honest, you know, what do you think is going to be the better solution to stress? Is it, you know, finding these log fires on and put it in the corner where you want to, or being out there and actually looking and interacting with it and smelling it and, you know, touching it? And not log fires, you won't touch a log fire, but you understand what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, I look at the log burning a stove quite a lot, since we have one, and I must say it has a wonderfully calming effect. But it's not pretending to be anything other than log burning stove. It really is what it is. Okay, Amanda, thank you, Amanda, for reminding me. The question that we hadn't quite touched on enough, I mentioned it, but I don't think we went into it, was whether it's better to be fully immersed in the experience, or if a creative activity would be something that you could combine with Shinrin-yoku. I'd like to add a little rider to that. We know from other ecotherapy settings that says...
Yeah, it disappeared when I tried to go to it.
Whoops. Hello, somebody just appeared. I'll carry on with, a gardening project can be particularly helpful, especially for people, say, who've suffered abuse in childhood with drug and alcohol problems. Ecotherapy seems to be particularly effective for depending on the kind of problems that you brought, but that is active participation, doing something, digging, tending horses, and so on, rather than just being immersed. Is there any thoughts on that? Is an active creative participation necessarily such a bad thing?
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, if you get that inspiration to actually, I'm on Facebook with people who create wonderful art out in the woodlands, you know, using leaves, trees, twigs, and it must be wonderful to be able to do that as well. It must be have that same kind of effect on the person who does it and the person who comes across it as well. So, and gardening, as you say, yes, you know, I found it great when you've actually got the smell of the soil in there. And you're working with it, it can only be beneficial, and to mix it with whatever helps you is, I think, more important. You've got to understand what is good for yourself. I wouldn't say just do one at the expense of the other. Yes, you know, that is both.
Amanda, is that getting to the question that you were looking for? Is that, do you have more you'd like to ask? Please come on screen if you're inclined.
Yeah, no, I was just typing that I thought that was really helpful, the reply, because I think what it's saying is that from what I'm getting from this, I just want to go and do it now. Unfortunately, I have no trees around me. I'm in a very bare part of Cornwall, but obviously very person-led. So maybe it's more about getting in touch with your own personal feelings when you're in that space. So if you suddenly decided you wanted to kind of create some art with leaves or gather leaves or do something, it's all valid. But if likewise, if you just wanted to sit down and just run your hands through the dirt or just be quiet with your thoughts. So I like the idea that this is very person-led. It's very personal. And it's very invitational. You've used that word, which is great. So it's accessible. It's whatever you take to it. So it's a very interesting practice, because it's something I think that we probably can all do quite naturally, but we need, like you said, it's good to have that guide and to have that interaction, if possible, with somebody else that can really sort of make you get into it, really. I guess it's like having a buddy. It's like having a shirin-yoku buddy that says to you, it's okay, you know, you take your shoes off, let's get back to being younger again, and letting go of all the inhibitions and slowing down and just taking time out to notice the light and the water and the leaves and the trees. So yeah, really lovely.
It's about, you know, if I'm going to leave you with anything, it's like reconnecting. It's just so important. Secondly, it's be childlike. And thirdly, there is no wrong answer. You know, if that's how you feel about something, you want to do something, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go with the smell. If you've got a sight or something that sound, go with that. If you just want to sit and just hold and just discover what this tree feels like, and even ask it questions. You know, there are invitations that go sometimes beyond people's comfort zone. You don't have to, but for some people that is important. Is actually one of them is you pick up a stone as you go across what I call the threshold. I didn't use that word earlier on. Is when you actually go into the woodland. You cross the threshold, pick up a stone and put all your problems or anxieties into that and leave it there, and then go out and do the things and come back and pick this up, or not pick it up. It's those kind of utilized. So there are, say, different ways, and this is what I've found, and not what a guide does, but those are important things.
And Amanda, just in case you haven't spotted it in the chat, Karen is suggesting have a look at Dorset Forest Bathing on Instagram or Facebook on their website. Practical activities in woodland and forest, and even in your own garden. So there's another link that I think we should put in. What's a growing list of things here. This issue of invitation, being you have to accept the invitation, you have to be ready to accept the invitation, it seems to me. I just want to double back to something that we had a mention from another of our fairly regular members, Heather, because I think this beautifully puts it. My best experience was at Christmas when the parish dressed a tree overlooking the Helford. I took that as an invitation to sit a while and be thankful. The idea that it doesn't have to be a person inviting you, you have to be invited and accept the invitation. I think that's a lovely poetic. Is that a point to I'm just conscious that we've gone 7 o'clock and we've been keeping you up for quite a long while. Are you happy to continue?
I'm fine, yes, I'm good.
Then what about that idea that it's the invitation, whether it's from a person or not, and the feeling invited? Is there something in that?
There is, you know, it is a conversation, I think, rather than, you know, as much as it is an invitation. You're looking for conversations. I suppose people look for answers and they look for questions. It's how you feel. Sometimes nature will give you that answer to the question. There's a saying, solvitur ambulando, which means solve it by walking. And it's been used many times by creatives. You know, people used to say to everybody, "Oh, just go out and have a walk," and the answer comes to you. So it's something that is there. It's being part of something, and accepting that answers will come, or a conversation will be had, or thoughts will come, because we are part of nature. It's all, we try and have building blocks of how things should be. We are interconnected, and I think that there is an important conversation to be had with nature and reconnection. So yes, I fully agree with that.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that there's still a question mark over how much of this effect, granted that there seems to be no dispute that there is this beneficial effect, how much of it is psychological in the sense of the person's own mental state, and how much of it is more physiological, the off-gassing, the chemicals that you are absorbing, and how much of it is somehow or other the connecting between the two. As I say, for something 40 years old, you're always opening up new questions. But do you have any thoughts on that? How much of it is not a placebo effect, exactly, but how much of it is a kind of internal spiritual thing, and how much of it is actually the environment out there doing this to you if you let it?
Oh, there's a mixture of spiritual, it started with Shinto and it started with Buddhism that had, these individual spirits in the trees, in the woods, you can go back that far. And I know you say it's 40 years ago. I think it's been up and down throughout human lives about what nature will do for it. It's like a rediscovering of modern day problems. I think that prompted it in the 1980s. So placebo effect possibly, but if it makes you as an individual feel better, then it's worked. And I think we've corned off our access and our children's access to nature. It's a marker in our system when the Oxford Dictionary starts taking out words for, like ash tree or nature words, and they put in things like blog and and the more technical stuff. So I think it's pervading all around us, and I think it's just fighting against it. I suppose it's rediscovering. I think there's lots of re words that I was going to write a book about the word re, because everywhere you hear what we're trying to get back or improve on, or so yes, I understand that. Could it be placebo? If it works for you, then it's gonna...
I do not mean to be disparaging about placebo effect. It is the most powerful medicine that we have, and there's more and more research, hard-bitten, statistical, quantifiable research to suggest how important the placebo effect is. If we could only bottle it, it would save us an awful lot of money spent on antidepressants and anti-anxiety drugs and so on. Plus a lot of even pain relief. There's some extraordinary stuff about placebo and pain relief. We do not dismiss this. It's a really important thing. We just don't understand it well enough yet.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yes, I was going to show you another book. There's a book on trees as well that you can buy as well. It tells about the wood wide web, about how they communicate with each other, and that. So again, it's an eye opener as well. And I had it somewhere. Anyway, I can get that later. I can put that up as well, so that's no problem.
Well, but I'm glad you do, because it gives me the perfect link to what I was going to come on to next. Last night or the night before, listening to 5 Live Science, I think it was, in my kind of insomniac state, I came across something I'd never heard of before. Have you come across Treezilla?
No.
Treezilla seems to not have been going for very long, but it is a website that you can go on to and identify the trees in an urban environment. It's specifically about identifying urban trees. So identifying them individually, but also trying to work out what kind of ecosystem relationships there are. And it's a citizen science project. And I had a quick look, of course, at Falmouth, as you would. There are about 8 trees along Wood Lane, and there are 8 trees on the run by the railway station, going up from the Dell car park up to up to the art school, and every individual extraordinarily interesting trees, some of those, but huge swathes of the country and huge swathes even of Falmouth and Penryn. Penryn, one identified tree. Come on, guys, we can do better than this.
Well,
I want to suggest that we set up some kind of citizen science project to start identifying the trees all around us. The website's there.
I've also, we have the Falmouth Spring Festival. I started doing a Trees of Falmouth walk as well a few years ago. And there are some great stories, great trees, historic trees, and especially when you think, of the climates we have and what they were growing in some of the gardens where they're growing lemons and oranges, would you believe, as well. So there's some very interesting trees as well. So there are people doing it as well.
Well, it's something I want to try and suggest that we maybe encourage. It is something where you can log in onto the site, see if the trees that you know are already recognized, and then you can start to upload the data. So I live on Wanaka Avenue. I've got a busy few weeks.
Yeah.
Right you are. I think we are starting to gradually get people drifting away, and it has been a long evening. Just to round it up, lots of people saying very interesting, fascinating stuff and so on. Thank you so much for inspiring, even one person says. But finally, Amanda asks, will it be possible to share the links afterwards in an email or similar? Amanda, what I'm going to suggest, rather than just emailing the people we have here, is that we put it into the website somehow, or possibly at the end of the video of the recording we made. Technologically, I'm not quite sure how we do it, but yes, we'll definitely make all of these links available so that you can also pass them on to other people, those who weren't able to make it for whatever, or if you're telling people about what fascinating talk you had last week or so, there's a place where they can get this information themselves.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to do that. And I'd like to, if I can, just leave you with two quotations, really. One is from Gary Snyder, who is an American writer. And he says, walking is the great adventure, the first meditation, a practice of heartiness and soul, primary to mankind. Walking is the exact balance of spirit and humility. Out walking, one notices ecology on the level where it counts. And just the last one is William Blake. And I have to read this one. It says, the tree which moves some to tears of joy is in the eyes of others only a green thing that stands in the way. Some see nature all ridicule and deformity, and some scarce see nature at all. But to the eyes of the man of imagination, nature is imagination itself. And I've got to say one thing, that at the end of the, when you go forest bathing, we have a tea ceremony. That's another very important thing, which I haven't really talked about. And that's where we actually, we sit around and have tea, and, people can read something or they want to do something. So it is, again, a more spiritual end to the therapy.
And a more social end as well, for some, which is otherwise very much around individual experience. Great. That William Blake quote's quite stunning. Okay, one last thing then. Our next talk, third Wednesday of February, is going to be with Judith Hahn, who some of you will know from her time when she was general manager at the Poly. She's also been involved with a lot of economic development stuff in Cornwall over a period. And she's recently been doing a master's on peacemaking, peace studies. And she's going to be giving a talk on the role of women in peace negotiations. So very different part of our lives, our different resonances there. But for now, we have a bit of a tradition, Paul. I didn't mention this to you. What we'd like to do is unmute everybody at this stage. David, can you help us unmute everybody? And we just give
It's not quite as easy on the new version of Zoom, but feel free to unmute yourself and join in the round of thank you for Paul.
Sorry.
So thank you very much.
Just a round of thanks for a fascinating talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Oh,
Great.
thank you very much. Folks, those of us in the science community team, we tend to stay on afterwards as the rest of you tiptoe out for a bit of a sort of post-mortem, just a chat in a more relaxed way about how it all went. So we'll say goodbye to you all, and hopefully we'll see you next month for the next talks.